All right, we have to settle down. We have a very, what shall I say, emotionally laden conclusion here to Yehuda's story. And welcome everybody from Israel and all other parts of the Northeast to this journey, which is in the literal sense and also the metaphysical journey. So when we left off last time, we were looking at the possible reasons for his decision to go to Palestine. And to refresh, we mentioned his growing religiosity, that he had moved away from his earlier commitment to Greek philosophy as a guide to truth, and he craved a more religious life. The weight he felt that he was a slave to man was weighing on him more and more, and we'll talk about that in a bit. We mentioned the political unrest in Andalusia, his dream of an independent Jewish life, and his argument at the end of the Kuzari when the rabbi decides himself to go to Israel, Palestine. Then there was the influence of the Arabic and Sufi philosophies of his time, of shedding the material world as one ages, and Pekut is writing about a more internal Jewish practice. Okay. Now, there were also...
Deborah, I'm sorry, Elaine, somebody, I think it might be Deborah, could you mute anybody who's not talking yet? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Now, there were, of course, plenty of reasons for not going to Palestine. First of all, there was the danger of sea voyage at that time. There were only about 5.5 months a year where the conditions were acceptable for sailing, okay? And besides the vagaries of the weather and the storms and dry squalls, which are like many times worse than a Hamsin, there were also pirates and highwaymen watching from land for boats, edicts from the Crusaders' time. Now picture the ships between 50 and 100 feet long. That's just a good-sized yacht. They were overcrowded with hundreds of passengers, large crews, rat-infested, though they kept cats aboard to try to control that, horrible sanitary conditions, loaded with foodstuffs, water, animals for slaughter for their meat, their own belongings, and cargo, commercial cargo. His trunk, his head at his neighbor's feet. And to make, imagine how long do you think a 3,000 kilometer trip took from Spain to Egypt? Well, it was 2 months or more under those conditions, okay. Now, then we have to think about his age. So it's not so unusual to adventure to another country when you're young, but he was now in his mid to upper 60s. Was he a fatalist, a martyr, a visionary? He was setting out alone, unheard of at that time. And after this unpredictable and perilous voyage itself, once in Palestine, he would then face the uncertainty of safety, hospitality, finding kosher food at Beit Midrash, any of the amenities that he was accustomed to. What fascinates me about Yehuda is how totally open he is. Everything okay?
Just tilting this down.
Okay. Oh, thank you. He works through all his fears right in front of us in his poems. We witness his struggle to upend his life, literally, test his faith in God, and basically go to Palestine to die. Alone. A real one-way ticket. There does not seem to have been any epiphany or any one thing that caused this. And though we've looked at all these possibilities, the real battle was totally and ultimately with himself. And the best example in his poetry is the next poem, which I'll describe a little, called Still Chasing Fun at 50. 50 being generic. He wasn't exactly 50, but somewhere in that area. So the poem starts with a reproach to himself for his worldly behavior at this stage of his life. He didn't regret his youthful pleasures. He enjoyed his wine, food, erotic adventures, activities, whatever, his possessions. But at this age now, he shouldn't be a slave to men, seeking their favor. He regretted having to play the social game. He should be seeking God's favor. And as we said, the adulation and attention he felt as a burden that stood between him and himself, his true religious fulfillment. So in this next poem, he imagines how it would feel to put trip. He was imagining what would it be like. He creates a storm as a metaphor for his emotional inner dialogue, truly a man in turmoil. And he describes vividly the chaos of being out of control, the helplessness of the crew to control the boat, the fear of the passengers, all a reflection of this anguishing decision. Now, because Ilana mentioned how much we're missing, and we know we are in the Hebrew, and we can't enjoy these poems in the original, we can listen to a few of the verbs, just imagining them as sound effects. So I pulled out 2 lines that I'd like to read to you in Hebrew, okay? And you can picture the winds howling, the waves crashing against the sides of the wooden boat, slapping, shifting, whipping. Even in English, those words are pretty precise. So here in the original Hebrew is a taste of how it sounds and how he used the sounds to emphasize his emotions. This is onomatopoeia, some 5 centuries before they actually gave it a name. So please, I ask you to close your eyes for a moment. Just listen to these words in the Hebrew. Veyamutu, veyanutu, veyamutu, veyanutu, klaim. Veyanoa, veyanua, veyazua, krashim. These sound juicy to me. All that is left is prayer. And ultimately, he weathers the storm at the end of the poem. He shifts to the first person, a Levite like himself, having his faith renewed. I guess that means he makes peace with his decision, standing on the boat facing Jerusalem in the east. The person that has begun the poem, divided against himself, survives the trauma, and emerges at one with himself. So now, Dan and Seth will read Raymond Shenlin's translation of Still Chasing Fun at 50, like a boy.
Still chasing fun at 50, like a boy, and yet your time could run out any day. You flee God's service, have no better aspiration than to be a slave to men. You seek the favor of the many, turn away from one who has it in him to answer every man's desire, if they would only ask. You won't be bothered gathering provisions for your journey, but lightly trade the banquet of eternity for lentil stew. When will your appetite say, enough? When will your lust stop growing back her maidenhead every month? Turn from her advice to God's. Abandon those 5 senses. Make peace with your Creator while your remaining days are speeding by. Do not expect half-hearted deeds will please him, or go to serpent oracles to learn your fate. To do his will, be tiger fierce, gazelle fleet, lion mighty.
And do not lose heart in the heart of the sea, when mountains seem to be sliding, shifting, when sailors' hands are limp as rags and skillful seamen silent, helpless. They were jaunty, sailing forward, cross now, thrust backward. You've nowhere but the ocean to escape to, the trap of doom, your only refuge. The sails are tilting, slipping, boards shift and tremble. The wind toys with the water like harvesters bringing sheaths to threshing, pats the water flat as a threshing floor, and heaps it up like mountains of grain. The waves surge like lions leaping. They recede in foam that coils like serpents. Waves succeed those waves and chase them, vipers that no charmer can control. Here comes a mighty blow. The mighty ship may founder. Mast and polar shiver. The decks, all three, and all their chambers are in chaos. Ropemen are in terror. Passengers, not only women, imagine, are collapsing. Sailor spirits fail and people faint. The strength of masts and skills of men mean nothing. When ballast hits the sea like straw and iron bars like stubble.
Each man is praying to whatever he holds holy, but you are facing God's own holy temple, remembering the sea of reeds, the Jordan, miracles engraved on every heart, and praising him who smooths the sea when it churns up scum. You beg that he may purify your heart. He will spare you for the sake of holy ancestors. Renew his miracles as you renew the Levites' dance and song to him. He will restore the souls to bodies, put back life in desiccated bones. At once, the waves are calm. They seem like flocks of sheep scattered on a meadow. The sun is setting and the stars are rising, with the moon as captain, watching over them. The night is like a Moorish woman dancing, wearing an embroidered cloth with eyes, cloth of sky blue set with crystals. Lost in the heart of the sea, the stars dart and wander, like men compelled to leave their homes as exiles. They make little lights in their own image, little flames and flares in the heart of the sea, pairs of ornaments on sky and water to adorn the night. Sea and sky, so like in color, seem to merge, while in between, my heart makes yet another sea, as my new songs and praises upward surge.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Whoops, wait a minute. Stop share, okay.
May I say something very short?
Yes.
These are 79 lines, and every second line rhymes, and the same rhyme goes all over this poem. It's unbelievable, and I must say that this translation sounds to me a lot better than the translations we had last time.
Yes, Shenlin is very different from Hawken. It's, I agree.
We read a few of his articles in my Kuzari course that I took.
Shenlin? Yeah. Okay, back. So this was, at least we looked at this poem in depth, and it was quite a process for him. But meanwhile, he was still in Spain. His friends were endlessly trying to convince him to stay, that it was foolhardy to put himself at peril by journeying to a country that was in the hands of barbarians, that he was being reckless. Well, Halevy argued, was Abraham being sensible when he left everything at God's bidding for a promised land? unquote. To challenge his decision was to accuse the biblical patriarchs of recklessness. His friends argued another argument that they had deep roots there in Spain. Their ancestors had reached the Iberian Peninsula in Second Temple times. How could he reject the home in which his ancestors were buried? Good arguments. And what about leaving his wife and beloved daughter and grandson? These considerations were to no avail. Sometime in the summer of 1140, Yehuda Halevy set sail for the east. It was almost 10 years since he first stated his desire to leave. He was between 65 and 70 years old, and as always, Halevy put his feelings into his poetry and left us 2 poems about leaving Spain. Back to Hillel Halkin, he uses the meter in English to try to convey the quality of breathlessness, short phrases, to convey the feeling of finally rushing off after having waited for so long, making up for lost time. The second one is a little bit after his hurried departure. Excuse me, so we will do 2 in a row here, and Dina and Judith will read to us.
Driven by longing for the living God, to hasten to where his anointed ones dwelt, I had no time to kiss my friends or family a last farewell. No time to weep, for the garden I grew, the trees watered and watched as they branched and did well. No time to think of the blossoms they bore, of Yehuda and Azarel, or of Yitzhak, so like a son, my sun-blessed crop, the year's rich yield.
So I'm continuing. Forgotten are my synagogue, the peace that was in study hall, my Sabbaths and their sweet delights, the splendor of my festivals. I've left them all. Let others have the idol's honors and be hailed. I've swapped my bedroom for dry brush, its safety for rough chaparral or scrubs, the scents and subtle fragrances that cloyed my soul for thistle smells, and put away the mincing gait of landlubbers to hoist the land that is the Lord's footstool.
Okay, stop share. Or unless she's continuing.
She's continuing.
Oh, okay.
I thought neither of wealth, nor the world, nor of losing all I accrued, but alone of my loins only fruit, my soul's sister and of her child, from whom parting still pierces my craw, my progeny and dear boy, his memory my one joy. Can Yehuda forget Yehuda?
I want to go there now. Can Yehuda forget Yehuda, by the way, is referring to his grandson who was named after him in the Sephardic tradition. He wrote 6 sea poems, among his finest work. The first one describes a frightening experience in a dry weather squall, which I described as a hyper hamsin. This time it's not a metaphor. This was out of life. Nancy will read this one.
Wheeling across the water. It's number 12.
There we go. Thank you.
I'll wait till next one.
Wheeling across the water, the waves ran thick and fast. Beneath a darkening sky, the sea churned loud. Then, surging from its depths, it made a sound, as a pot makes when it boils. Cries filled the air, and stout hearts fell, and failed to quell the fear. The world was half abyss, half precipice. The ship that reeled from that to this, sick with the staggers.
Actually, this is the poem which has 70 lines, and you started to quote it from the 15th line.
Oh, really?
Only a few lines. It has 70 lines.
7-0?
7-0. It starts,
Wow.
it's one of the two lines like that. יועץ ומקים במרום שחקים ועל ים רחוקים צדקו סרח. And it goes 70 lines. You started from the 15.
Amazing. In the book that I found this is what he used. So I was not aware of that. Thank you.
He did not put any remark about it?
No, other than these were two of the sea poems. So I picked this one and the next one, which was to be in comparison because it was a calm moment as opposed to a storm experience. And I just want to explain that when the weather was nice, the sea captains took advantage and they sailed further from land so that, of course, they were safer from the pirates seeing them. But this was also a strange experience for Yehuda because he was totally detached and remote from land, so he wrote about that, which this one Barbara will read. And give you.
Just a comment on Yehuda and the sea poems. He really has a landlubber's absolute terror of the sea. He's terrified when you can be frightened in the midst of a storm, but he's also, he has a sense of anxiety when it's calm because he sees it as like a vast desert with nothing there that can save him. And it's interesting for me to see his contrast of how he never finds any pleasure at being on the sea. So here's...
And you can see his reluctance even to get on the sea. I mean, it was interesting that the portion I read was written before he'd even taken his journey, as he was kind of toying with the idea and obviously using the imagery upon reaching a certain age. But it was kind of part of, it was in his kishkas even before he made the journey. Geez, this is something I'm going to be really...
This is dangerous.
It's going to really frighten me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Has a new flood drowned the land and left no patch of dry ground? Neither bird, beast, nor man? Has nothing remained? A strip of bare sand, a pleasure to scan. But all that is seen is a ship and the span of sea and the sky, a Leviathan as he churns up the brine, which grips the ship as the hand of a thief grips his find. Let it foam. My heart bounds as I near the Lord's shrine.
Thank you.
Elaine, can I ask if he wrote these poems on his way to Palestine, how did they survive?
That's a good question. In fact, part of my own next question was, who was he writing these for?
Yeah.
I guess he kept a notebook, and I guess he gave it maybe to. By the way, he was traveling with two people, which is not a big part of his story, of course. But a friend of his had business in Alexandria, so he timed his trip to be with him, and his son-in-law was also with him. So I can't answer you directly, but perhaps
that explains it. Yeah.
Perhaps that helps. Yeah. So, okay, here. He arrives in Alexandria right before the high holidays. Then came the rainy season, as we know, and winter, not a time for sailing. So he would spend months in Egypt before sailing to Palestine in the spring. Alexandria was one of the most important Jewish centers of the world. His friend Halfan, who we had talked about, that he met when Halfan was 2 years in Toledo, probably making business networks. His friend Halfan had arranged for him to stay in Alexandria with one Aharon el-Amani, a prominent, wealthy, and cultivated rabbinical judge. Elamani showered him with his largesse and hospitality. Yehuda was in need of rest, especially after Barbara explained how frightened he was anyway of anything on the sea after an exhausting trip. And he felt these social pressures. And after calling on all his mental resolve to leave Spain, he was not ready to accept the luxury and adulation that was waiting for him in Egypt. So he declined invitations as much as possible. He wrote this letter to the Nagid of Fustat. So the Nagid was the highest governing Jewish official appointed by the Caliph of Egypt, very prominent man, and he wrote him this about his situation. And though there's a lightness of tone, it does show you his troubled state of mind. He felt obligated to accept Elamani's hospitality in Alexandria despite his mental and emotional condition, although later he would cherish this man, his host, and write him over a dozen friendship poems, which we talked about last time. I would like to read this to you. I will show it to you here. Hold on a minute. Oh, you know what I wanted to show you? I'll show you this first, yeah. You see this little map I prepared, everybody? Can you all see this?
It's not on yet.
Oh, hold on.
You didn't click on the share.
This is kind of a little antique map from 750 of the Common Era, but it just shows you, here's the Med, of course, in Mediterranean. He would come to Alexandria, and eventually he would be going down to Fustat. So right now, here he is. And let's go to this. Okay. So this is the letter that he writes to the Nagid in Fustat. I have been blessed by God's giving, and am not pressed for a living. Indeed, having all that I need and more to pass on, I wished only to push on and be a credit to myself and a burden to no one else. And so I thought it would be handier to speed through Alexandria and proceed on my way without further delay. Yet I soon met a man who defeated my plan, a wise judge in your employ, your grace's envoy, that scholar of eminence and companion par excellence, our very own Rabbi Aharon. He plied me with munificence and regaled me in magnificence with a feast for each repast, and a house that is vast, full of alcoves and larders and quarters for boarders, with beds to alight on and tables to write on. His kindness surrounded me, and his goodness confounded me. Somebody please mute. For the more I was cold, the more he cajoled. And the greater my resistance, the more stubborn his persistence, until it ended in my failing to keep him from prevailing. And so I and my kin and company, who came with me across the sea, are now ensconced in his home, sheltered under its dome, consuming its treats and digesting its meats, and imbibing its fine collection of wine.
Sounds like a very articulate Dr. Seuss.
Sounds like the nicest way to say, help, get me out of here.
Yes, you can feel his ambiguity.
So Elaine,
yes.
Was it typical of the time to write these kind of
Absolutely.
rhymed?
Absolutely. They wrote the most flowery panegyrics whenever they had an opportunity. I mean, this was very much part of his
The translation is amazing, though.
It is.
To bring it into English and it is magnificent.
I couldn't agree more. That's why I chose to read it. Sorry.
So he took this opportunity and escaped with impunity.
Very good. Very good.
Elaine, does this sort of seem like the Christian ascetics?
This
You
is
know,
what?
the Christians ascetics who went into the desert and left all their worldly belongings to be closer to God. It was this somewhat the same kind of thought.
He probably knew about it.
It's not very Jewish.
It's an interesting question.
He didn't encourage that kind of strange behavior of leaving the world in a sense. And
I know that in Hakuzari he writes very strongly against this. Very strongly.
yeah.
Against the Christian behavior.
Oh.
Against living going to the desert and being alone. He wrote very strongly against that.
Wow. Well, interesting. So he spent the high holidays for the first time without his family and friends, certainly a poignant time for him. He really regretted the stir that he was causing among the Alexandrian Jews, but he was a rock star, and they fought over trying to meet him. To make matters worse, along with these conflicting feelings, he felt he'd lost his muse. He also had the premonition that he did not have long to live, so that began to haunt him. It took him a while to regain his equilibrium, and actually he was there for a couple of months before his friend Halfan came from Fustat to take him with him back. So I showed you the map of Fustat already. They joined a caravan for that week's journey. And by then, it was after the late summer floods had receded and the season of autumn plantings. So the rich soil of the Delta was newly plowed and planted, and that seemed to Yehuda like the garden of the Lord. Egypt's history spoke to him even more than the scenery. No other place outside the land of Israel had been the site of as many biblical events. He felt that he was already on inspired a poem. We're not going to read that, but he invokes the first of the plagues where it turns the Nile into blood, and Moses and Aaron's rod in that poem, igniting even more his excitement about being so close to the land of Israel. So Fustat was one of the wealthiest cities of the world. The old Cairo had an estimated population of 200,000. Much of the spice trade, the most lucrative business of that era, passed through the warehouses in Fustat, and his friend Halfan was one of the merchants, and obviously very successful. He was busy building networks of global commerce. Okay. By the way, 27 years later, Fustat would be utterly destroyed by the Muslims who were wanting to destroy it before the Second Crusaders, the Christians, came to conquer it. But for now, it was a great metropolis. Compared to his self-isolation in Alexandria, Halevy's stay in Fustat was completely different. In fact, he totally regresses. It was highly social. He spent most of his time with the Nagid, his secretary Natan ben Shmuel, who will be very important later, and his friend and host Halfan, the businessman. After a party during Hanukkah, we're in early December, at the Nagid's home, very lavish. He wrote this rhymed letter to the Nagid's secretary, Natan, who had prevailed upon him to take part in the old pastime of verse competition. You remember from the very beginning, we read his poem, which he hadn't done in years. Though your powers alarmed me, your magic so charmed me that every vow I had taken was forsaken. My youth was restored, new verses poured forth. No longer recalling that evening was falling, I forgot my fear that my end is near, with so much still left to do. Challenged by you, I reached for my lyre. I couldn't let your gauntlet just lie there. So later, the same week, after another festive Hanukkah dinner, not quite sober at the time, I'm sure this is coming to you all as quite a surprise as it did to me, Halevy wrote about that verse competition, this time to Elmani back in Alexandria. He describes in this the circumstances of being challenged to participate by Natan, the Nagid secretary. I'm going to just read this one. At once, when every woman was arousing, and I could have loved 1,000 had any loved me back. How lovely were those days that never came back. Do you remember the poems you and I would pen as young men? Would you believe such times could come again? Now that the disheartened heart is old, and our heads are gray and bald, and we look about and see that the lights have gone out, and no rain breaks the drought. And yet, the other night, as your well-wishers were drinking and hotly thinking of their longing for you, a memory come alive, was plied with such strong brew and got so high and grew so spry that I began to versify. Attended by the most lovable of men, I wrote a poem to a friend that I now send. May you not be offended by how I started or ended, and may you comprehend it as the gift that I intended. I think it's pretty amazing. Now, we will read the poem itself. I will not read it, you will read it. Now, picture this garden party that he is going to describe in this poem. There is a wall of lattice work. Women were allowed to stand behind the wall, look through the holes at the performers and musicians that were performing for the all-male audience. Yehuda was sitting in the all-male audience, and a lot of his attention was given to looking at the lattice wall through the holes at the women. And that will be your background for this poem. Jonathan and Reuben will do the honors for this poem.
Let's have more lutes. Let's have more lutes for the lovely girls, you sweet singers. Give the instrumentalists their chance to serenade the secret sirens looking through the lattice. Is it their fault, unwitting archers that they are, that their arrows have pierced hearts, though their bare arms never sought to lift a sword? Well behaved they learned to be from Laban's daughter at the well.
Should I continue?
Yeah.
So languidly they move that you would think they could barely raise an eyebrow, much less bear the armor of their ankle, and it would be sunburned. Let there be light, they say, and it shines in their faces. Let it be dark, it's in their raven tresses. Their tunics are bright, like the splendors of friendship. Their hair is as black as the gloom of goodbyes.
They're so like stars that I would be the sky in which they orbited forever. Full or delicate, luscious, lithe or lanky, I could fall for them all and for their perilous red mouths, each perfect with 2 rows of pearly crystal. Be gentle if you catch them making eyes, at me, I hope, gentle with their wiles, for they are burdened by silver bells of apples and of pomegranates, and roses sprinkled with rare essences. And what about that stately one back there, swaying like a palm tree in the wind? Just count the hearts they've stolen. I ask you, will they pay for them, or is it retribution for the curls on their soft cheeks our eyes have poached on?
Can Egypt hold me when my soul's thoughts pull me to Zion's mount? On the day I take to her comforter's trail, my pilgrim's hair uncombed, my feet unshod, my heart's flame will scorch her stones, my eyes will flood her soil. Why, even as I write, the tears pour down, gusting from my sighs as copious as all your many gifts, each wrapped in tide. A bounty greater than these splendid girls, these fountains, strains of lutes, exotic birds. May our greetings to you, sire, soar 100, 1,000, 10,000 times higher.
Oh, yeah. Well, as much as he is enjoying the delights of the party, he is still saying that with all that enjoyment, still his unbounded, soaring feelings for going to Zion, of course, outshine that. It's a singular scene. This renowned poet on his way to a solitary life in the land of Israel with his newfound friends, the elite of Egyptian Jewry, getting drunk, improvising at poetry as he did when he was young. The man who had given everything had gotten some of it back. Having put the world behind him, Yehuda had found that he was still in love with it. More than the Nile or the scenes from the Bible was the reawakening of his carnal desires expressed in these last works. This is a man enjoying all his responses to what he sees and feels, and he accepts them joyously. He only regrets these feelings of enjoyment. Healthy guy. As in Spain, again, as he prepared to leave, he had to defend his reasons against all his friends trying to convince him to stay in Egypt. Of course, he prevailed, and after considering first the land route through the Sinai desert and the prospects of sitting on a swaying camel for almost a week, he decides on the safer route despite his fears of the sea, from Alexandria to Akko. So he books a berth to Palestine on May 7th, 1141. By the way, Akko was the Crusaders' main harbor, had the largest Jewish community, although only about 200 souls. And here was this elderly man about to set out on his last journey. So we ask, was he seeking martyrdom? Was his back against the wall? Halevy was the first Jew we know of in the Middle Ages who traveled to the Middle East not as part of a religious community and not going to join a community, but completely by himself. An act of individual piety. He would find a desolate country, and we know he was afraid, but maybe that was the point. He was seeking completion. He was seeking to test his faith. And he was at last where he always wanted to be, entirely in the hands of God. The risk was the point. We will now read, Rudy will read to us, the last poem to come down to us, one of the simplest and most moving he ever wrote.
At such a time, my eyes can't hold the tears back anymore. They pour like hailstones, hot from a storm-lit heart. To part from Yitzchak was the easy part, even though the shock of it was rude. But now that Shlomo is gone too, I'm left in solitude, with no hope of seeing anyone again. And that's the last of all my friends from Spain.
He was utterly alone on a ship sailing to Palestine, the greatest poet of his age. Halevy must have died in early July or late July or early August, less than 3 months after arriving. Uncertainty over his fate probably set in soon after his lifetime. There was a letter to Halfan in Fustat, dated November 12th, same year, referring to, quote, our master Yehuda, Zayin Tzadik Lamed, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, which means, may the memory of the righteous man be a blessing. That tells us Yehuda Halevy was no longer alive when it was written. Another discovery by Goynton in the Cairo Geniza corroborates Halevy's death, this time in a letter from Natan, remember the secretary of the Nagid. This was to a religious scholar in Damascus. In the section about
I assume Your Excellency is aware of the matter of Master Yehuda, Judah Halevy, that righteous and saintly man. The memory of the saintly is a blessing, about whom the true prophet prophesied truly. The eye has never seen. There's a quote. He was a knight of piety and Torah. His righteousness is attested by his words that sing like birds to eternal rest in the garden of the Lord.
So these letters tell us that Yehuda had died. But how and where did he die? We're not sure. There is no description of his death in the writings of his contemporaries or of the generations that followed. The earliest is found in a Hebrew miscellany entitled Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain of tradition, published in Venice in 1586 by the Italian Jew Gedalia ibn Yahya. So this is about 450 years after his death. In this book is a fanciful tale about the marriage of Yehuda Halevy's daughter to Abraham ibn Ezra. Then, hold on a minute, Yehuda Yahya adds the following. In Halevy's old age, Ibn Yahya adds, he journeyed to the land of Israel, where, reaching the gates of Jerusalem, he rent his clothes, trod the earth with bare feet, it being written in Psalms, quote, for thy servants take pleasure in her stones and favor the earth thereof, unquote, and recited his lament, Zion, do you wonder? An Arab horseman, stricken with envy of his religious passion, charged at him and trampled him to death. Well, Yahya's description of Yehuda's death is certainly the way Halevy would have imagined his own death. There he was, the gates of Jerusalem, where he had longed to embrace the earth and written about kissing the dust in some of his poems, the dust of the earth. This description was highly debated as a romantic literary fiction, martyring Halevy. Also, there were very few Muslims at that time after the Crusades, so the horseman most probably would have been a Christian. Some scholars thought it had a kernel of truth, others that he never reached Palestine at all, and another theory was that he did reach Palestine but was so devastated that he returned to Spain a shattered man. Again, thanks to the Geniza, we have some early references to Yahya's version. We have a copy of a letter, legible parts of this letter, from October the 6th, 1141, 5 months after he sailed to Palestine. This is also from Natan, that secretary to the Nagid. Written in an ornate and cryptic Hebrew, he mentions Yehuda, appending the letters Zayin Kuf Lamed for Zecher Kadosh Livracha. May the memory of the saint be a blessing. So in rabbinic Hebrew, the word Kadosh for saintly or holy man also means a martyr and refers to a martyr's death. And then a few lines further down, there's a fragment that says, at the gates of Jerusalem. So scholars have put this together. It's very tantalizing. There are many debates and discussions about Yehuda's death, but a version of this Yahya description is still the most accepted one. That's what we have. We also have a report from a Benjamin of Tudela, some of you may have heard about, who visited Palestine about 30 years after Yehuda's death, describing a grave in Tiberias that had his name on it. Epilogue. Yehuda lived at the end of the golden age of Andalusia. In Andalusia. Literally, by 1146, 6 years after he sailed, the Almohads had conquered southern Spain. Thousands of Jews fled to the north, parts of nearby European countries, and others like Maimonides settled in Fustat in Egypt. Few returned to Andalusia. The days of though some Hebrew verse was still forthcoming and it was gradually pushed to the margins. Though some Hebrew verse was still forthcoming, it failed to spread to other Muslim lands or to the Ashkenazi communities, and gradually was pushed to the margins of Jewish awareness. Most of Halevy's poems were forgotten. Though his secular poems continued to be read for a while, they gradually dropped out of circulation. Best remembered are his piyutim, and of course the Kuzari, which is studied and often debated along with Maimonides by religious and academic philosophic studies. The last topic, which deserves a study on its own, if someone wants to rise to the occasion, is his legacy. He has been described as the greatest of the medieval Spanish poets, the first romantic Jewish poet, a national poet, the first Zionist poet, and a messianist poet, and has been claimed by different political groups. Doesn't fit neatly into any one category, and the legacy is still evolving. Maybe we'll add our own thoughts to his legacy after reading him. There are so many amazing poems that he wrote that I, of course, couldn't include, and I urge you, if you enjoyed them, to go to Shenlin's book. There are wonderful poems in both the Hebrew alongside the English, and we've said how nice his translations are. And there are many in the Dream of the Poem, the book of a compilation of medieval poetry, has a big selection of his poems. Just want to tell you, it has been an incredible joy for me to study this life, this amazing poetry, and convey my appreciation for this complex and most human personality, who I really believe was a rock star in our Jewish cultural story. And I thank you all for the privilege. Oh, thank you.
That's great, Elaine.
Oh, I was so moving for me. Thank you all. Thank you.
And we want to thank Daniel.
Yes.
And Elaine, you wrote to me a bunch of wonderful questions to send us out into Chavruta with.
Thank you. It's yours. And thank you for taking over the Chavruta.
So now,
you're going to share the questions with us, right?
No, I actually sent them and I...
Oh, okay. So hold on. Let me find them. I thought you were going to...
No, I kind of like thought that's your...
Okay, hold on. Let me find it then.
Talk for a few seconds if people want to. I mean, I thought this was such an interesting journey with Halevy because I could really understand for the first time. I mean, I guess I've studied him before in classes, but now I have such an image connecting his poetry with the journey of his life. It actually really helped to understand both the poetry and the history of the moment. I really appreciate it, Elaine.
Oh, yes. Well, he lets us witness the whole life projection. It's amazing to me, too.
I was also thinking when we were reading about this, I mean, this is an obvious observation, so sorry about the obviousness of it, but when we were reading the poetry on the ship and his incredible anxieties, I was just thinking about artists, which I'm not, and just thinking about artists and how it's the ability to not shut down your anxieties and your feelings, but to actually put them out there on paper or canvas or theater or whatever. Because I was thinking like what it could have been. This could have been a guy who's like for a man to be complaining about and showing his fears about what it is to be on a boat, as opposed to saying, being a macho man and not showing his fears, which I'm sure most men, especially of the time, would not have shown that they were like sissies on a boat or something like that. And it's just that incredible ability to be vulnerable and to let it all out, and of course to have the talent of the paint or the word or whatever. But I appreciated the concept of an artist so much reading his poetry.
It's a good process, yeah.
Excuse me 1 second, Elaine.
Yeah.
Can you please just go to your email and find that email and send it to me again? I can't seem to find it. I thought you were going to do it.
I'm sorry for the confusion. Yes.
It's okay.
Okay.
Oh, wait. I think I found it.
Okay.
I found it.
Yeah.
It's fine. I'm fine.
Okay.
I'm copying them. It's fine. Guys, keep talking.
Yeah, does anyone else have anything they'd like to say?
Yes, I'd like to say something, and that is, somebody described him as a landlubber. I think he described himself or somebody like him as a landlubber. In his voyage on the sea, the images he uses to describe the ocean are all land-based. Like if you go back to number 9, where he's talking about, he describes the waves like lambs in a meadow when it becomes calmer. And he describes wheat on the threshing floor when the waters are rough, blowing around. So I think it's very interesting that the images that he uses while he's riding on the sea recall his experiences on dry land.
I had the feeling he was someone I would want to know, someone who would be a friend in a crazy way, and that in his older age, he could reinvigorate himself with both the dream of Palestine, but also be in touch with his younger self and restore himself. And he was a person of friendship, and it just felt like he had immense vitality, and that really spoke to me. As Dina says, he expressed his fears, but he expressed his lusts. He expressed his love, a love of family, of country, of women, of life. I mean, he just seemed such a vibrant person. So you
Unusual,
brought him to life, Elaine.
unusual for a religious man, actually.
Yes.
I would
Yeah.
like to add something, if I may. I told you I did a work about Kuzari, and I read that the people of Al-Andalus, he was born in the Christian part of Spain, and he arrived later to Al-Andalus. But the people of Al-Andalus described him as the essence of the country and its meaning, and the stronghold and its leader. It's unbelievable.
Mm.
And when he arrived to Egypt, he was accepted with so much love. They knew his poems and they admired him.
I just want to say I'm not shocked by the amount that he was involved in all of the other aspects of life, because I think that's what we've seen throughout from the very beginning of the influence that and the introduction of erotic and homoerotic poetry and writing about wine. You know, Ray Shineland's book is Wine, Women, and Song. So I'm not surprised. This is not to take away from the exceptional nature of who he was, but as to being shocked by the amount that he lived life, I think that that's something that that strikes me was much more acceptable, to have a balance of in you know, being involved in all of these kind of natural manners of life, of eating and drinking and love and all of these pursuits, along with being able to be a religious person, because most of the people doing the writing and most of the people still lived within a very Jewish context and confines. So,
Mm.
and it's
Maybe that's
pretty
why we talk
amazing.
about it, say 800 years later. He can transcend to be with us and be contemporary in some way.
Elaine, let me know, and when you want me to put the questions up, I can do it anytime.
Anytime you're ready. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
You are my partner.
Hold on. I've got to find the share thing.
In the meantime, just want to quickly say, Elaine, thank you so much for taking us on this journey. Your approach, your I guess like a pedagogical approach, the way that you took us on this journey was really, really magical, and really allowed us to connect to this figure as a human, as someone who could, like we said before, someone we would want to get to know. And I've also, learned a little bit about Yehuda Halevy before, but never in this kind of way. It was really just a lovely journey. So thank you, and thank you for engaging all of us and in reading the poems, and just the way that everything was interwoven was really thoughtful and intentional and appreciated.
Thank you so much, Ruben. Thank you.
I second you, Ruben.
I third you.
I fourth you.
I ate you.
Be careful. You'll start something here.
No, it was wonderful. Renee, would you like to read the first question?
Like the 4 questions. Okay. Has your aging process gone towards more selected routines or more untried new interests and activities? You're talking about us, our aging process, right? Has our aging process gone toward more selected routines or more untried new interests and activities?
Michal, would you like to do the next one?
Did you ever nurture a sense of mission that went against the conventional and made you sacrifice something for?
Something for it, I think she meant. Okay, who hasn't? Barbara. You're not unmuted. I can't hear Barb.
Barbara, you're on mute. Yeah.
How about we'll do Nancy?
I got it.
Yeah,
Got it?
he's
Okay.
relying on Rudy to be the technological. Anyway, does Yehuda's dismay at being a slave to man resonate with you? What does that mean to you? How do you deal with that?
Miriam.
As COVID-19, here we go. As we learned, Yehuda was a believer of the Neoplatonic philosophy as a younger man, before leaving that to become more deeply religious, Jewishly. Did you experiment with other religions or philosophies during your youth? Describe.
And I guess Helen.
Has COVID-19 affected your philosophy of life?
So before I send you into the groups, maybe some of you can take pictures with your phone like we've been doing.
Can you get all the questions on one page? Could you enlarge that
Let me
page you're on?
do my best. Give me a sec. There you go.
Beautiful. Wait, I'm going to take a picture. Hold it. Not yet. One more sec. Okay.
Okay.
1 second.
Susan, these questions are in the mail from Elaine or from...
No, they're not in the mail, but what I'll do right now is I will share it with on our listserv, okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that would be great. I love these questions, Elaine.
Oh, thank you.
Hold on, it's going to take me a minute because I have to copy the link. You know what? Why don't I send you into breakout rooms, and that'll take like 30 seconds or something, and then I'll manage to make a link for this.
Good.
Susan, please put me in a breakout room, honey.
I have you in one.
Great.
Thank you, Susan. And do a good job. So, yeah. Debarty. Yeah, so the question resonates.
What part of it do you think made it went against the convention and made you sacrifice something?
Oh,
You shared
yeah.
before, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going very much against the conventional response. Even now, COVID-19, there are endless articles out there about what a horrible thing it is that IVF clinics are closing. My take on it is this is an incredible time for us to discover what we can do without IVF clinics. So I'm definitely going against the grain of the accepted philosophy. Thank you. I appreciate the time.
I like the question of aging. Like if you discover new things or you do the old things that I don't remember exactly the framing of the question, but I feel that what can happen to me if I try so many new things. So I love the idea of trying new things, and especially I don't have to go anywhere. So I'm here at home. So I go to many Zoom meetings and just try to open my head to a lot of new things, which keeps me normal and also keeps me busy. Because if I'm not busy, I'm getting crazy. So I think that this is really relevant question for me, and I think it's a great question.
Susan, you weren't here, but each of us is choosing a question that we want to engage with.
Oh, it's okay. I'm gonna float around, so keep going.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm trying to make sure I like the one about being unorthodox, though. Did anyone get it, the question?
That's very interesting, because that when you say unorthodox, you could mean I read it as saying dabbling in other religions, but I don't think that's what you meant by
That's not what I meant.
It's right.
You're right. I guess like selected routines and against the conventional. So against the conventional.
Right.
Is what I was meaning by unorthodox.
Mm.
As opposed to the series.
Well,
what did you guys choose?
I personally, I found that every one of them kind of tugged at me, and most of them with one quick thought. And then there was one that really resonated a lot. One of them is the aging process. Absolutely. As soon as my daughter went off to college, literally the next day, I found myself and for months trying to figure out what is it that I can now do. I've had this very happy life doing what I wanted to do, and in these last 20 years dedicating so much of it to the possibility that maybe my child might need me in the evening, and just being involved with them and watching them grow up. And then it became a big search, and so eventually I found immigration clinic representing political asylums, people seeking LBGT people who are persecuted in their countries, coming here and getting applying for asylum. So that was massive for me. But the one that really, really resonated with me was there a time we went against convention. And what I've been thinking a lot in the last few years is, I'll try to do this in 2 minutes or less, was that when I first got out of the graduated law school, I went to the district attorney's office, and I didn't go because I wanted to put people in jail. I went because I was deeply idealistic, and I felt that if there was really to be justice in our city, then you needed people who were prosecutors who were not going to abide bad arrests and the like, and who were going to throw out all the exculpatory evidence and things like that. And being this very sort of ordinary white privileged girl from Long Island, it never occurred to me that so much of this is taking place outside of the earshot and the knowledge of district attorneys. It's taking place during the course of illegal arrests. And by the time you get to the district attorney's office, the police officers would know exactly what to say and what not to say. And you'd wind up just being part of a cog in a very unfair and, horribly oppressive regime. And basically the New York County District Attorney's Office was a very good office, and they really did try to put measures in place to protect people. And yet it was hard to do that. And you nevertheless had a lot going on, which is what prosecutors were complicit about. And there were a lot of basic rules that I just didn't follow because they seemed so horrible to me at the time, which was offering the same, you weren't supposed to offer the same plea bargain to everybody. You're supposed to not give someone the opportunity to a plea bargain so they would go to trial so you could get trial experience. And that seemed horrible to me. And I can remember my bosses telling me all of these, and I found trials to be easy. It was something that came easily to me, but I didn't want to do this. And there were so many little things like that. And I can still remember my bosses saying to me, all of these people have a dozen trials and you only have 2 or 3. You're the worst attorney in the office. And I felt a little bit better later on when I left, and I had written up very detailed summaries of everything that was going on with my 100 cases. And they came to me and they said, nobody's done that. But now, years later, all of these little micro things are being written up and investigated, and because of the the dense forest of the web, all of people's experiences are coming out like that. And all that time, I kind of took my boss's word for the fact that I was just a bad attorney because I couldn't bring myself to do these things and that I must be wrong. And yet I needed to do them anyway because it was my own personal sense. All of a sudden, years later, and I would never have had the strength at the time to just go to a newspaper and say, by the way, do you know this is the policy of the New York County District Attorney's Office? So it was, and when looking back, it's something that it's a part of my life that I have even a lot of shame about, that I even was involved in. Imagine being a prosecutor, I should have been teaching people how to read with what I had. But now I'm trying to do things that are more akin to teaching people how to read. But at the same time, I realized, you know what? I did cost myself a lot by going against those conventions. And I know that, I never got any credit for it, and yet I know I did the right thing. So.
How about other people? I might just stay with this group. It's so interesting.
I wasn't going to talk about it. I was going to contrary about COVID because I don't think it's really affected my philosophy of life. But like you, Helen, or like everybody, kind of it's a part of the aging process. I quit my job a month ago, and I started. I'm doing a lot of what Helen's doing. I work for a clinic called New Sanctuary Coalition. I began that about a year and a half ago, working with undocumented immigrants. Not all LGBTQ. Actually, most of our friends are from Central America. But I became interested in doing a kind of law that mattered, as opposed to the corporate litigation that I was doing, and the skills do apply and cross. But it took me a long time, actually probably about as long as I've been a member of Bavli, to kind of make that decision that my self-worth wasn't based on how much money I made and kind of where I was working in the corporate litigation environment, and it was more important to do something that allowed me to sleep at night. And so I pulled the trigger at a really strange time because I'm having a lot of difficulty getting things going. I can't get banks to call me back to even open up my IOLTA account, my attorney account. But I'm really glad I made this change now, because as a consequence of COVID, it's allowed me to kind of think more, because I'm home and alone. Well, not alone, but home. To think more about I don't know, to reinforce the wiseness of this decision. And I'm at a point in my life where it doesn't really matter how much money I make, as long as I'm doing the right thing. And to some extent, people said to me, my brother-in-law said to me, well, why didn't you just wait and quit 2 months from now? If you, because I was, and I said, it was just time. It was time for me to work for myself. It was time for me not to, again, have my self-worth based on the percentage increase in my salary I got that year, or whatever my performance review said, which, Helen, I agree with you completely. A lot of times you look back at those reviews 2 and 3 years later and you think, the negative that they're writing about is actually a positive.
Yeah, it took 20 years.
And so, yeah, 20 years is a long time. It's actually, exactly for me, it was 29 years doing the kind of law I was doing before, and transitioning over the past year and a half into the kind of law I hope to do in the future.
We have Chava from Israel. Chava?
I don't think she can unmute because she's driving.
Oh, okay.
I'd rather she'd be safe.
Yeah. So I didn't realize. So how about Avi and Michal?
Yeah, Michal talked a little bit for me too. The issue, the only sort of point I would make is that Michal is a woman of action, and she starts her day and get going and find a new class and does, I think she's busier now than she was busy a couple of months ago. Somehow she engaged herself in opportunity to learn and try new things. That's her personality. I am more of a reflective person. And frankly, for me, I'm still sort of absorbing this period in our life. And I have not yet found a way to step out on the other side of the valley. Not in my head and not in my actions. Clearly, you do a few new things, but I'm still sort of acknowledging this particular period of time of our lives is still a very, very strange and difficult time for me to step out and say, okay, it is what it is. Get going with your life.
Mm-hmm. Julia? Julia, I can't hear you.
I shared before, so I don't want to take up more time.
Okay. I guess.
Say something?
Yes.
Susan?
Yeah.
Okay, I just.
Oh,
can I?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to share something after I heard everything that was said. This time of Corona, of being detached from everything, made me think about, and I started an internet radio for Jewish writers and poets and other issues. All are literal. And that made me a kind of reach out from the closure that I was in. Do you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Okay. So up to now, I already recorded and broadcasting like almost 10 writers, poets, 2 musicians, and had some conversation with people from different places in the world. And I was thinking also of suggesting that we will make a Tikkun Leil Shavuot instead of our retreat, Tikkun Shavuot, and have it also on the radio. But I will write it down and I'll suggest. I'm just telling you what I was thinking about. But this was my way of reaching out. And that was before I understood really what's going on and how it will continue. And I didn't know about Zoom. It was really in the beginning. So the radio really helped me and helped other people because we made a kind of community that can talk, that can share, that can create.
Yeah.
And share the same problem because all the world right now is dealing with the same problems.
Yeah.
So that's it for the moment. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I guess I haven't shared. So mine is nothing to do with COVID. Mine is more to do with aging and convention or not convention. And none of what I'm saying would come to a surprise for anybody of you who knows me. You all know me. And I would say, for me, the lack of convention has been in the powerful movements around us. Let's say Black Lives Matter. Let's say re-examining what I learned about Israel and Zionism and Jewish identity, or like I just read something from Haaretz that spoke of a woman, Edith Zertel, who's a historian, who talks about kind of the culture of death and how dying for your nation, has been such a mantra, not just for Jews or Israel, but just in general, and how unlike many people, I think, who have gotten more conservative as they age, I think through the influence of the generation, my daughter's generation and people around me, I've become more radical. So I've become increasingly more radical. And sometimes I find it very, very difficult, and that I'm very seen as a contrarian. And it's very difficult for me in Jewish groups, especially at like Heschel, when it comes to Yom Ha'atzmaut, and I'm watching the combatants for peace having a joint program of Palestinian and Israelis and Jews who have lost loved ones and are all saying that death is not the final answer, and just things like this. So I know it's no surprise to anybody. I'm not articulating anything new, but just for me, it's kind of interesting. I've watched my parents became more conservative as they became older, and I think I've seen more people becoming less conservative and actually becoming more open in different ways. And it's sometimes a struggle in terms of the communities you belong to. And it's sometimes hard. I feel very comfortable to express it here, but if I go into my school, I can't express these things. With a few people, maybe I can, but I can't overall, because the overall feeling still feels like sort of when I grew up, as far as what the children learn. So I've said enough.
Whatever it means, I spent a lot of time at Heschel staying strictly zippered up because I valued my children's social lives. So.
Well, that actually kind of plays into, I was going to talk about the luxury of aging and the fact when you get older, you're allowed to be whichever way you want to go, if you want to be more conservative or more liberal. There's just something about kind of being at a point in your life where you don't have to worry about or I don't know, whatever other reasons, just because you're of a certain age, you kind of can have thoughts and do things that perhaps you can't do when you're younger.
I just want to jump in with one more thing that is actually like all this stuff with Joe Biden going on. I find myself furious that I understand. So I understand that people don't want Trump. I mean, I understand he's our choice, but sort of the silence around the difference around the treatment of this one accusation of sexual assault as compared to Christina Blasey Ford, whatever, the fact that all of these women have come forward to defend him, I find, no matter what, the politics of it, very upsetting.
Yeah.
And that's against the grain of what everybody else wants to hear.
Spent so little time paying attention to it recently.
What?
I'm sorry. I feel as if the silence is making you think I disagree with you, but it's just one thing. Every once in a while, you see a story, and it's like, no, I can't read one more of these stories. I just can't. I just want to feel as if, as a culture, as a civilization, as Americans, we're going in a direction where we're not going to be seeing these accusations in the next in the younger generations. And the ones that have happened, I just see it as wrong, bad, everything. I just don't want to read about it anymore.
Really? Zoe said that
Susan,
at least 50% of her friends had sexual assault during college.
Really? Still.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say, that's right. They say like 1 of 4, 1 of 5. It's true.
And that's just reported. That's
say, don't go onto that second floor alone. You go into that room alone and, but then don't blame yourself. No, it's with us. It's true.
Well,
but
I mean, Zoe's counselor was, Seth, you were talking.
No, I was going to ask, don't you think Biden's, going on television and talking about it, to some extent, reaction to what you're talking about was to say, this is different than the accusations against Trump or against Justice Kavanaugh. I'm going to address it. I'm going to answer any questions you want. It's a very fine line he had to walk to respect, the narrative of the woman who accused him, and at the same time, be as public as possible about it. My only point is that I think it's a reaction to some of the concerns that you're expressing from the more liberal elements of the Democratic Party. Because it would have been easy just to, I think it might have been easy just to, well, you can't attack the victim, but to just ignore it and watch it go away. But there was a need within the party to say something about it and to be as transparent as possible.
It took
A
weeks.
little bit of optimism for you.
It took weeks, and I don't see it any differently than Gloria Steinem sticking up for Bill Clinton. I see, like, the fact that Stacey Abrams and people before they even investigated or heard all came up out of political necessity.
Yeah, I remember my knee-jerk reaction to it, as opposed to my knee-jerk reaction to the woman who accused Justice Kavanaugh. You're right. It's there's something immediately that makes you kind of shift and think. But you're right. Political
Nobody wants
expedience
to
is
talk
the only
about it.
motivation. Right. Yeah.
Like, I just wonder, like, where are we? And forget all of this, just the broader question is, where are we going to go back to? Are there going to be changes? In America, it's different, probably, Chava, than in Israel. But you've got your own shit. Are we, look at
it is different.
The millions of people out of work, the millions of people on job lines, the amount that I, as a part-time teacher, have to teach without a recognition that I'm part-time. The workers, are workers going to wake up, even people in schools, I'm a worker, and say, no, you have to think about our needs too, not just the bottom line of the people paying the school tuition or the students. It's like the workers are important in every single setting that we have now. And they have very little rights, and the poverty and the distance of money. I mean, it's just astounding to me. And I just don't know where we go about it.
I wonder if we're going to come back after all this and be able to say, my gosh, when you look at all the disproportionate deaths and suffering, and say, we really do need a more socialist system. We cannot look at the person who's vacuuming out my hallway right now and realizing that his risk of dying is, 10 times greater than mine is, and that is positively, we can't look at this anymore. We can't look at the people, in the faces every day who we see in our supermarkets and in our hallways, vacuuming, and say this is acceptable. It's not anymore.
No.
And this is what I'm wondering if it's going to endure. And we'll become more socialist as a result of it, which we need to be. I mean, the current form of capitalism is not something acceptable. And maybe this is pointing it out.
But are the people who are suffering the most, and I don't mean the people who already were leaning towards that, are those people still, are they gonna be able to galvanize around it? Are there gonna be enough people who will kind of choose something like that? And will enough people, it's like for me, for you, for all of us here, we're all fairly privileged. I don't have to worry about anything, in terms of money for years of my rent to pay. Of my, I don't have to worry about income coming in. I'm not in the top tier, but I'm in the top 10%, as most of us are. And so
I have to worry about income coming in.
You have to worry about income coming in.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So say more. You too, Chava?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
And I'm getting older, and these questions are here. I cannot I cannot pretend that they are not here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also not only about me. It's families around me thinking about getting gold in this kind of society. How do I? It's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Aging, it's a big issue. It became a big issue. It wasn't like that before. And also the question of family. Can we survive without normal? Forgive me for this word. For normal with just a normal family, I don't think we can.
You don't mean normal family, you mean extended family? That family?
I don't know how to say. I don't even have yet the right terminology. But a family. You cannot survive by yourself anymore.
Family, relatedness, and
Yes.
I'm seeing that it's 2:45, and this. You guys keep talking for a few minutes. I'm going to go around to the other rooms and tell them we have to come back.
Thank you,
Are we
Susan.
supposed to go back?
In
We're
about
supposed to go back also?
Well,
in about 5, I'm just going to go say to everyone, like 3-4 minutes, we're going to come back together.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Chava.
Yeah, blah, blah, blah. So we don't have to get this now because Susan's here and we don't have to continue with it, but think about it. And if you have an answer.
4 minutes. You have 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
No, those are good questions. You know,
It's not.
How you feel about that, Ilana, but
depends who you are.
All the stories in Israel, have been very critical because the past 10 years they've been trying to suck dry the health system. In the past 10 years. Lo shamim otach.
3 minutes. 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah, 3 minutes.
Okay.
You guys hear the birds, by the way, behind me?
Yes.
Good.
Hey,
don't miss the
are they
opportunity.
Jewish birds? Are they?
Are those real birds, or did you put some kind of?
Like Donash's wife.
Right.
There's our 3-minute warning, hey?
I see that.
Yeah.
I mean, I also wonder, he didn't get to go to the temple or to Yavna or to the sages, all of that, right?
But it's the only other time in my entire life personally that I've ever had that experience of being isolated, like for a medical reason. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Can't hear her.
He came home. We have this little infant, and he comes.
Yeah, my daughter was just born.
Wear a mask. I was furious. Okay. We have about 2 minutes. I'm going to pull us back to the main group. Elaine, will you help sum it up and get people to? We'll have people say a few words or whatever. Okay.
Jonathan could do it.
We'll see. We'll see.
All right. Miriam, did you have any COVID-19 kind of little?
I mean, just
sort of changes.
Living here in Brooklyn, it's both the gratitude to nature in terms of going outside and seeing all of that, and also the fear, that this little virus, this little thing, is so powerful. That nature's powerful on both ends. And I've had experience as well of like walking out and just it feels so strange, and there's fear if somebody comes close to me, I'm like, could go away. And at the same time, there's a smile there as you kind of, if you can pass within the 6 feet, but there's just this overwhelming awe of nature in terms of, it's the both sides, and it doesn't know the boundaries and the rules, and it can give us the beauty, but we have to be very aware of what else we do, and our role in all of that is quite powerful. And
Yeah.
that sense of, I know there's people getting together now and wanting this to continue so that plans can be made for the change. There's a worldwide group called Cresta, and their kind of slogan is, "We can't waste this crisis."
Huh.
We need to start thinking now about how we're going to change things, because as soon as we're allowed to go back, it'll just dissipate, and it might last a little bit. We might be a little bit nicer to the people at the grocery store, but it'll just go back, as Judith says. The comforts will overpower, and so they're trying now to figure out what is it that we want to change.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm so glad to hear that.
That's good.
All right, I'm gonna get us back. It'll take
Okay.
a few minutes. Nancy, can you hear me? I'm gonna ask Nancy.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Susan.
Nancy?
Yes, Susan.
Could I ask you to lead the end, which just means like calling on a few people to say a few words or blessings or anything that they want to share?
Did Elaine leave?
No, I think Elaine, would you
Oh,
like?
there she is.
Would you
Sorry,
like?
no, I just didn't see her. That's all I was asking.
Oh, okay. Do you mind?
I don't mind. I'm not sure exactly how to do that, but I probably just would open with, would anyone like to say something at the end of this very, very rich study and chavruta? Maybe a blessing, or maybe say something from the chavruta that was important to you that you'd like to say to everyone. I don't know that I'll call on you because I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but let's just let people individually contribute if you would like to. No pressure. Does that sound okay, Susan?
Yeah, and sometimes people raise hands, you can see them.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'll start. So first of all, thank you to Elaine for Yasha Koach for a wonderful teaching. So we've followed this journey of Halevy, not just through his poetry, but through his whole life that she explained. And I noticed that he was like trying to get back something that really meant something to him. This whole idea of going to Palestine and getting back to its like roots and getting back to a certain kind of identity. And I think the thing I was noticing in our question group is the idea of what do we learn from the experience we're going through now, and how do we take that back with us as time goes on. So for instance, like one of the examples was that I mentioned, like we're in social distancing now, and yet previous to this social distancing, we oftentimes were physically in proximity with others, but we were ourselves distant from those people. So I would hope that we would go forward and be less distant, the same way that Halevy was trying to be less distant by getting back to his origin in Jerusalem and going to a place that he really wanted to go to. So I'm hoping that I think Miriam said it in our group, not to lose this moment. We need to learn from this moment and go forward and not just regress back to what we were. So that's kind of what we took from this. I would hope my blessing would be that people can go forward and move forward and change kind of the reality we're in. And that's that.
Thank you, Jonathan.
To me, this whole session, and even earlier, I was never much into poetry. And it opened my mind to the beauty of poetry and how much you can learn about a person when they write poetry as against writing a book or an essay. There is something special about a poem. And I think the Yehuda Halevy experience has proved that. He really talks about himself. And this whole Andalusia session has been mostly about poetry. And it's been very beautiful and very special and very moving.
For me, I really loved the process, like Elaine, how you taught yourself a new thing that you didn't know about, and it connects to one of the questions that when you age, you learn new things and you try new things that you never thought that you're good in, or public speaking and research. And so it's a really good opportunity now, and especially that we don't have to rush and to go to another place because we are home, to try new things and to be open to anything that comes on your way and say yes to everything, except getting close to people. But I think that this is beautiful, this kind of process.
Yeah, Helen.
I found in our group that...
Wait 1 second. Elaine was saying something and you didn't realize you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Am I on mute?
No, we hear you.
Okay. We're physically distant from people. In a sense, we're more emotionally and mentally less distant because we're in this together. And when we see people, I mean, my reaction to people I'm seeing is very different. I would not really see people before. I was really in my own whatever, but I'm so much more aware of people around me, and I'm questioning how are they managing, what is their situation, you know, or do they have people who are sick, or are they struggling? It's very interesting. So I do hope that when we don't have to change as much going forward at some point, that we will want to change for the better and keep some of these new insights.
Yes.
Helen?
Yes, well, I felt in our group as if, you know, we just had a few minutes, and I kind of felt as if the questions were so resonant that we kind of could have been on there for about an hour just talking about so many ways in which we're affected by the poetry, but and how we are now, and looking back and looking forward. And I will say one thing that I think has come up for all of us, and that was so interesting about Halevy's life, was that the idea that he was writing this poetry about revelry at the same time that he had this deep-seated purpose, that where he was simply going to set aside everything and go off on a religious mission. And it tells us something, I think, about ourselves, as far as when we do decide to try something new in this after COVID, and even just in the ordinary course of our lives, but especially as informed by the way that the world is going to be new and different after COVID, is that we have to realize that we are so many parts, that we're not monolithic, that we have to always get away from regarding other people as that way too. And that's something I've seen actually a lot of examples of in the last few weeks, of people behaving in unexpected and really unwelcome ways, and then realizing that my judgments about them were wrong, and that they in fact were entirely capable of apologizing and proceeding differently. And we have to just realize within ourselves, we decide that we're going to try something new, that if you give it up 2 days later, you can pick it up again. What drives us, and that what's powerful within us, is a continuum and a spring that we can always continue to get something from, that we're not one way or the other. And we always have to sort of constantly just be trying to go back to what we think is.
Amen.
Yes. I was particularly struck thinking about what's it like to get old? What's it like to realize that your life is finite? And so it came to him what was really important for him. I don't think it's just trying something new. I think it's looking at one's life and knowing that you're not going to be around forever, and thinking about what more do I want to do or need to do to express something important to me. And I could really relate to that as an older person, you know, I told my group that particularly after the teaching from last time, thank you, Elaine, I started thinking about, okay, so what's really important to me in my finite life? And I'm not going to say like Yehuda Halevy, but I realized that I want to be living in Israel some of each year. And somehow it's something that has, I was introduced to Israel relatively late in my life. I mean, the first time I went, I was in my early 40s, actually. It was a family trip with Abby and Manny. And so I haven't had that much time with Israel, even though I go there for, what I'm trying to say is I have limited time, and this is something really important to me, and I realize that I would like to make that happen. And I'm so grateful for the Bavli Yerushalmi community. It's not like, oh, I want to go there, but I don't really know anybody. I feel like that's a home that has opened up on many different levels for me. So I guess you're all, what we are saying is to be able to use this time and discover something, what's really important to you. And if you're able to do that now, and then to think about how, like you were just saying, Helen, how would you like to hold on to that when things get a lot busier?
You certainly have a home in Israel with us.
I just wanted to share, thank you for that, and everybody. I mean, I resonate with everything. I just want to kind of speaks to everything that was said for me, that he says at this stage of his life, he doesn't want to be seeking the favor of men, but seeking God's favor. The way I hear it is, at this stage of my life, I don't want to worry about who is going to think what about what I have to offer. I'm seeking the favor of the God within, or the whatever is truest for me. So I really love that line, and thank you, Elaine.
I don't remember if it came up, but 10 years before he left for Israel, he went on his first trial to go to Israel. At that time, he decided to go through the land, and something stopped him in Morocco, and he went back to Spain. So the thought of going to Israel was not of old age. It was long before. He was writing all kinds. In the Gnizah, they found lots of letters. He was thinking about it in his poetry.
Elaine, you're muted. You're talking, but you're muted.
Sorry. Wait a minute.
No, now you just muted yourself again. You were unmuted before. You had unmuted yourself. Now you're good.
Yes, I thought I mentioned that this was like 10 years from the first time that he mentioned out loud that he had this plan and dream. And yes, in fact, he did go, and he got as far as Morocco. And I was another episode that I chose not to go into, but it's absolutely true. Yes. And then he went back, and then it took another 8 or so years until he finally left. Thanks, Ina.
I think a lot of the Kuzari, there's a lot of discussion. It's like he's having a discussion with himself. The Khazar king says, well, then why aren't you going? And so it took him so many years to sort of settle on really actually getting up and moving. So it could not have been easy to also leave your home. It's a process. And I guess that speaks to it's hard to leave what's comfortable for us, even if what's comfortable for us isn't always the best thing.
Right. I think it's so true that change is a process, and that you can feel like, oh, I want to make a change, but oh no, and you kind of go back and forth and tell yourself it's not important. But that's just part of the process. It's not like as you're saying, Susan, you just wake up like, I'm going to do this, and then you do it. I mean, maybe sometimes it does work that way, but I think it takes a while. Like you get little senses of something not feeling quite right, and that it takes a while to think about what that is and what you want. So the fact that he went and came back, and then when that kind of makes sense to me. Yeah.
Elaine, would you like to wrap up?
Oh my goodness. This has been so enriching. I have loved this topic. I think it's apparent. And I would be very interested in throwing out an idea that occurred to me when Ruben joined the group and alluded to the amazing culture from his geographical birthplace that I don't know if the group has ever studied, but he alluded that there was such a rich culture, and that would all connect up to what we've been doing. I sort of would feel very bereft if we jumped into something so different that we left this in a vacuum. It would be wonderful, just throwing that out, if we can connect that to something. And I'm so pleased to see how because my intention was really to show you how human and open and this journey was. And I really feel like so satisfied that everybody was on that journey and seems to have really gotten something from Yehuda's life. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. May I add something? Actually, I took this Kuzari course at the university as a kind of homework for our retreat, which never occurred, and I don't know if it will occur. But that's why I took this course.
Yeah.
It better occur, and it better be useful, and it better be that we end up in Spain, because I ain't never been to Spain, and I'm relying on all you guys that we're going to get there.
I'm in.
I'm still waiting for my tour in the Prado in Madrid.
So may we all...
Anna, who taught that course?
His name is Raymond Leicht. He comes from Germany. I think he's a professor of history of sciences. I think. Now I'm taking another course with him of history and philosophy of sciences. Raymond Leicht.
I'm gonna end us so that instead of ending with different conversations, just with the prayer that we try to listen to ourselves personally about our own lives and about the life of our people and the life of our country and the life of all of our neighbors and the life of our planet, that we try to find ways to move to more fruitful, productive, respectful, and just places.
You are just wonderful, Suzanne.
You covered it.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Shalom.
Laila Tov. Bye.
Shalom.